Dead Man's Hill. No one knew who named it that. No one even seemed to wonder about it. Kind of tough to imagine now that there was a place in our safe, well-ordered little town with such a name. What must our parents have thought? Not much, apparently. Mom, we're going sliding. Dead Man's Hill? Yeah. Okay, have fun. Wear a scarf. Tough kids. Tough parents. Their kind may never walk or slide this earth again. The hill itself, one of the numberless bluffs above the twists and turns of the La Platte River, was in fact just a block and a half or so from our village's one traffic light, past a few quiet houses where even fewer children lived, and then a 3-minute trudge across an open field. If we happened, on a bitter, bright afternoon, to meet up with sled-toting children from the Falls village, a half a mile south, it was all very, "Hail, fellow, well met," as if they were exotic foreigners, the advance party of the Peary expedition, and not your classmates, whose insufferable snickering you'd had to endure all year long in health class. You were all out here together, the few, the brave, willing to tow your little sleds of questionable stability to the precipice, the very lip of Dead Man's Hill's top-rated run, the equivalent of a double black diamond. To take that slow, calculating breath of lung-busting air, see your answering exhalation hang for a split second there in front of your nose before vanishing. Feel your stomach, your lungs, and then every part of you tensing in anticipation, then to mount your sled and push off, to drift downward with unearthly speed. It wasn't that you couldn't control that little old flexible flyer of yours. Oh no, it was that you just barely could. Tugging firmly enough on the crosspiece rudder, artfully combined with tilting your bulky, bundled body, did in fact allow you to steer ever so modestly to the left or right. For those who favored taking the run sitting up, the steering was done by tugging on the sled's trusty rope, which was attached to the rudder in double knots it would take a chainsaw to untie. Those thrill-seekers opting for the arguably more macho head-first, belly-down position grasped the crossbar itself with mittened fingers, ignoring the ice-coated rope altogether. Of course, in either case, you had learned to keep your booted feet perpetually hovering just inches above the speeding snow in case you discovered that the time for applying the brakes was right now. You might well have learned this maneuver after a particularly memorable run, or possibly it was from watching the Flintstones while dining on a medium-sized Tupperware container of Frosted Flakes. And then there was that special move, the execution of which will write you into local history as either a ninja or a nebbish. And of course, we are talking about the bailout. Having originally been of the more dignified sitter-upper tribe, I had experienced only 2 real effective methods for simultaneously steering and concluding a run: falling off the sled to the left and falling off the sled to the right. True, the lower-to-the-ground liar-downers had to deal with stiff necks, snow in the face, wedgies. But they did appear to stay on their sleds in far greater numbers, so down on my belly I went. I clearly recall the moment one long-gone late December afternoon when John LaPierre and a majority of his many younger siblings hove into view. John was positively swaggering in his snow boots and proudly trailing a toboggan that Père Noël, or one of his trusted associates, had wisely propped up in their breezeway rather than drag into a living room already packed to the rafters with gifts. The thing must have been 7 feet long if it was an inch. In my memory, it gave off an unmistakable new toboggan smell. We crowded around, considering what was clearly going to prove a Dead Man's Hill game-changer. The toboggan had a long, handsome, and generously padded seat of green vinyl, on which we could already imagine ourselves riding like a pack of pashas, and beneath which the varnished slats of fine-grained ash gleamed in the sunlight. With much fanfare, La Famille Lapierre parked their toboggan a respectful distance from the top of the slope. Most of the family were by now vibrating in their snowsuits with excitement, and Lori and Linda, John's youngest sisters, immediately rushed to place themselves in the frontmost positions. This glaring violation of family protocol was met with a hoarse bark en français, causing the younger to scamper clumsily backwards like puppies. In moments, the whole clan was seated in amended birth order, John and his brothers in front, followed by their sisters. Their combined weight, which had seen a recent increase due to a holiday diet heavy on the sugar and carbs, along with especially generous slices of prize-winning tourtière from not one but 2 visiting mémères, caused the toboggan to sink into the fresh powder like an underinflated air mattress. This brought a round of derisive and ill-advised hooting from the spectators. Glaring at us like a caged predator with an exit strategy, John raised his blue vinyl bottom and, grasping the gracefully curved bow with hand-knit, mittened hands, began tugging on the oversized sled, inching it forward, while hollering to his family to dig in their booted heels and pousser. With this effort, the toboggan began to move slowly and jerkily forward. Our laughter turned immediately to cheering. The mighty sled had now reached the lip of the run and teetered forward as if posing for a winter sports magazine. With one more semi-coordinated kick from the crew, it was gone. We hustled a giant step forward and watched as the toboggan with its great load of Lapierres accelerated with breathtaking speed, rose and fell majestically with each mogul it encountered, and shrank toward the fence line below and the river beyond. Heartfelt screams in several octaves rolled up the hill, some from those who managed to remain aboard, and some from their siblings who did not, rolling away like little booster rockets that had served their purpose by putting the capsule in orbit and were no longer needed. By the time the mission was aborted and the toboggan ground to a halt, owing either to heroic driving skills or the physics of an ever-lightening load, the lower half of Dead Man's Hill was strewn with half-buried Lapierres, whimpering and laughing. Of course, we cheered generously for the grandeur of it all, but as John and 1 or 2 of his brothers bent their backs to the task of hauling this greatest of all beasts back up the hill, we let out a collective sigh as we climbed aboard our own modest sleds and hurled ourselves over the edge to our individual fates. At the bottom, we would sit precisely where and at whatever angle we landed, or if lying down, stare up at the blue sky, savoring the stillness, the deep, silent heart of the afternoon. But all the while, from above or below, we would be keeping a weather eye on the Lapierres, round-eyed and ruddy-cheeked and unquestionably ready for more. But surely there would come a point when Laurie or Linda or their smallest brother Stephen would be moaning with a growling stomach or bursting bladder, or become too bruised, tired, or soaked to carry on, and that would signal our chance. Approximately 2 hours and many runs later, this moment at last seemed to have arrived. The younger Lapierres now lay like baggage among the snowy ridges surrounding the launch pad, noses running and exhibiting little interest in any more downhill sports. John, his brother David, and their sister Louise, though stiff and trembling a bit from the exertion and the cold, as we all were, began arranging themselves on the padded seat for one last run. The vacancy brought on by their shrinking numbers yawned at us. We could not imagine not being invited now. There was a mildly awkward pause. "Well," said John, as if he had invited us, and gestured to the rear. Besides the Lapierres, there were 5 of us remaining on the hill. Despite the facts that A, 5 is clearly more than 3, and B, all 5 of us were a good bit larger than the departed 3, we climbed aboard, and the 3 older Lapierres scrunched forward to make as much room as they could, which was still not really enough. A seated ballet ensued wherein legs, arms, and torsos of every color tried out a number of potential angles, including entwining with their immediate neighbors. This was all done in a surprisingly matter-of-fact and businesslike way. Any embarrassment that might have arisen from this unexpected intimacy buried under several layers of wool and nylon. By now, we had all either seen or accomplished the takeoff. With a mighty grunt, it was done, and we were over the edge, and in seconds we were traveling faster than any of us could remember our one-man sleds having ever gone. Packed cheek by jowl as we were, we could feel the tension and joy in each other's bodies as we rocketed downward, stung by wave after wave of powder. There was no shouting or laughter, not a word, as if a pact had been made, as if we all knew that riding in silence might draw us together, might drive the memory of these 10 or 15 thrilling seconds deep inside each of us, to remain there safe through the long years of our lives until middle-aged yearning draw it out again. So, are you imagining a dramatic crash? An ill-advised group lean to one side that caused a rollover at which point laughter could no longer be contained? Or how about this one, that somehow not one of us fell off, and thus our overloaded ship gained so much momentum that we overshot the usual snowdrifts at the foot of the run, slid inexorably another 10 yards into and somehow through the few pitiful shards of barbed wire fencing there, passed between 2 towering maples, and found ourselves staring down a short, steep bank at the La Platte River, its swift water rushing by. And that maybe, just maybe, we were saved by this. That again, without a word, and at the last possible moment, we all remembered to apply the brakes. Is that what happened? My memory says yes, no question. Just as there was no need to ask each other whether and to who we would reveal this dramatic episode of the afternoon's fun, this little flash of mortality on Dead Man's Hill. Silence by now was one of us. In silence we agreed. No telling this story. But I am telling you now, because for all the changes, all the development in our little town, Dead Man's Hill is somehow still there. At least I'm pretty sure it is. I haven't checked lately. You'd have to drag your sled across 2 newer roads with 2 long traffic lights. And then the parking lot of the True Value Hardware and Kinney Drug, and cut around behind the dumpsters at the Hannafords, overripe and steaming in the frigid February air. Your sled would be a tough, high-tech plastic, aerodynamically designed to within an inch of its life, and overpriced. On your already sweaty head would be a helmet of sufficient strength to allow you to survive a fiery crash at Daytona. Deep in a zippered inner pocket, you'd have some energy bars and, of course, a cell phone. But a few more strides and you would feel yourself slipping. Slipping back 2 generations in time. You would hear shouts of pure joy careening through the frigid air, wild echoes that will grow fainter but never quite die out. You'd find yourself looking steeply down at the undulating folds under 6 inches of fresh powder, the dark, gnarled trees, the fence, the bend in the partly frozen river, curling like a beckoning finger.
Dead Man's Hill was originally written in 2015 by Vermont musician, songwriter, and storyteller Pete Sutherland for the Vermont Stage Company's production of Winter Tales, an annual celebration of the season featuring staged readings of short stories by local writers, read by local actors, and featuring local music. Pete grew up in Shelburne, but is adamant that any resemblance to actual persons, places, or documented mishaps is purely coincidental. The story was read by Nils Fredland of Heartland, musician, dance caller, and the artistic director for Revels North. Editing and mixing was by Zachary Mills, class of 2021 in audio engineering from American University in Washington, D.C. The music behind me, and which you've heard throughout the story, was by Burlington pianist and composer Peter Krag. Peter died in 2020, leaving behind a number of home recordings of his brilliant and diverse works. His playing was always insightful, his creative ocean vast, and still largely uncharted at the time of his passing. It's to him and the Krag family that this performance is dedicated. I'm Mary Wesley.